Great to be here today. And it's my job to introduce our speaker. And, the work that's done at Hanford Site beginning in the 40s and continuing today has really transformed our region and shaped the Tri-Cities into what it is today. It's really hard to overstate the impact that Hanford has had and continues to have, so it's fitting to devote today's luncheon to that topic. Hanford is what brought my family here initially in the 50s and after I was born in the 60s, and I'm sure many of you have similar stories like that. So we all are tied to that project in some way. So today I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Brian Vance. Brian's the manager of Department of Energy's Office of River Protection and Richland Operations Office. In his role as manager, Brian's responsible for the safe, efficient, and effective cleanup of the Hanford Site, which includes projects and operations such as groundwater remediation, hazardous waste, and facilities decontamination and disposal operations, treatment and disposal of radioactive chemical liquid waste, and the design, construction, and commissioning of the world's largest complex of nuclear vitrification facilities, the waste treatment and immobilization plant. Brian has more than 30 years of experience in the nuclear industry. Prior to joining the Department of Energy, he was the project director for CH2M Hill Plateau Remediation Company, a product manager at Westinghouse Electric Company, and a director at Areva. Brian served in the U.S. Navy for 25 years as a nuclear-trained submarine officer. And while on active duty, he gained extensive project and program management experience as a submarine force acquisition professional, including 2 assignments as a major program manager prior to his retirement at the rank of captain in 2009. Brian holds a bachelor's degree of science in meteorology from Pennsylvania State and a master of business administration from the University of North Carolina. So please help me welcome Brian Vance.
It's great to be here today. Glad you were able to see the before picture before I came into the job. Really, it's great to be here to talk about the site, talk about what we're doing, and I think really important for our community as well. One of the things that I think we're most proud of is our community engagement, community relationship, and the support that we receive from all of you and what we do, as I think you recognize, a relatively complicated mission at the Hanford Site. So I'll give you a brief overview, really just to set the stage. Just from a show of hands, how many have been on the site? Not the folks that work out there? Okay. I think if you probably haven't been on the site for a couple years, the pandemic really slowed down our tourism operability or opportunity. But I think what we see today is a renewed interest in coming out and visiting our site, which I think is really important because there's perceptions of what Hanford was prior to the pandemic are far different than what they are today. And the department working with our contractor partners, I think we've fundamentally transformed the relationship we have to be in a position to deliver safe, efficient cleanup at a size and scale that is generally hard to understand unless you've actually seen and been part of the site team in the past. 586 square mile site, very large site, 2 DOE offices, both the Office of River Protection, which is really focused on the tank waste treatment mission, and then Richland Operations, which is effectively everything else, with 6 prime contractors, all different contract types. And our role really as a DOE contractor partnership is to create an enterprise approach to our ability, and a team approach to cleaning up a site that's really on a massive scale. Our mission is framed up there. Those are the simple words. I think the easier way to think about it from an underpinning perspective is our philosophy is to optimize the investment that is made by the taxpayers to reduce the risks of the Hanford site, not only for our workforce but our community as we clean up the environment. And so that optimization per dollar invested by Congress is really pretty important. And even though we get a very large budget, I'll talk about that in a minute, it's certainly not enough to clean up at the site at the pace we really want to proceed. So we really have to think about the site from a risk reduction and risk management perspective, because that's the way we create the safest workplace, and that's the way we provide the most protection for the community. I've left the range of things we do on the site, the key set activities, just to give you a perspective of the breadth of work we do from groundwater remediation, which is on the order of 2 billion gallons of groundwater per year that we treat, through soil remediation, and John could talk eloquently about the big dig, massive amounts of soil being moved and dispositioned appropriately, to facility demolition, to construction, not only of infrastructure, but nuclear projects, and an operations perspective around that effectively aligns 12,000 people, the federal employees, our primes, and the subs to our primes, in working as an aligned team to progress a mission of national prominence. And each of those individual activities in our key site activities is big by itself. Together, they make one very massive project across a size and scale that's really hard to imagine again unless you've seen it firsthand. The priorities that we place as a DOE leadership team, first and foremost on the health and safety of the workforce, but really those priorities are intended to create the environment for exceptional contractors to deliver great value and progress a mission as efficiently, as effectively as we can across all the artificial borders that exist between the two DOE offices and the contracts and the contract types. It's that enterprise model that holds it all together. And from a leadership team perspective, we want to create all those 5 things, or focus on those 5 things, to create the right environment and culture to, again, progress a mission of a size and scale that's not really very well understood. We always have to talk about the budget, because it's always exciting, and people always care about it. So if you look at the last 4 years, the Congress has invested nearly $11 billion in the Hanford site, and that's really an investment not only in the site but also in the Tri-Cities. This year's President's budget of $3 billion is the largest combined President's budget we've ever received, and as you all recognize, the President's budget is the start to an enacted budget, and that's the money we actually spend. But I think the $3 billion figure is important to recognize, number one, the administration's commitment to the cleanup, but also the administration's confidence in the DOE and contractor team that's here on the ground doing this work. We can't garner that kind of support unless we're delivering taxpayer value, doing it safely, doing it efficiently, and predictably progressing this mission. And so I think that's really not only a testament to the department and the contractor partners, but also our community and the support we receive across a broad spectrum of stakeholders and tribes to be able to garner that kind of support for the work we do. And we appreciate it all. The circle on your left is, I call it the virtuous circle of publicly funded activities. So if you think about what we have to do, we have to deliver safe and predictable progress, which creates that strong support across stakeholders for Hanford that run from local to regional to state to national to tribes. And that support provides funding, and that funding provides our ability to continue to make progress. And we really focus very heavily, both the department and our contractor partners, again, on making sure that we're investment worthy, so we can continue to garner the type of support we need, but deliver that progress that is critical to the foundation of the economic future of the Tri-Cities rides very heavily on Hanford. We have to continue to be successful given the amount of money that comes here, because within that funding that comes to us, there's a very large portion of the funding that has to go to subcontractors and small businesses, a part of the contract requirements of our contractors. And so between $400 million and $500 million per year go to small businesses a lot of them around the community, that actually provide more of that economic foundation that's so critical to our long-term success. And beyond that, if we think about a bad day at Hanford, and there's lots of ways you could define a bad day at Hanford, but a bad day at Hanford creates a concern in we make national news, we make international news when we have issues like that in our community and at our site. People don't want to buy Washington apples. They don't want to buy Washington wines. They don't want to come to the Tri-Cities with their businesses. They don't want people to live here. People from outside family members are calling family members here and saying, why are you living in such a terrible place? And if you Google Hanford, if you want to scare yourself, I don't do this before I go to bed, but if you want to Google Hanford, it's a difficult picture to talk about, because it's really a history of Hanford that people don't understand the rest of the story. And part of our job in the rest of the story is making sure we celebrate our successes and we talk about the progress. And we talk about our progress in a way for our workforce that instills that pride, because we really have 12,000 ambassadors going home every night from the site, and we really want them to go out and talk about Hanford in a way that gives people the rest of the story. And I tend to try to look at big picture, and so let's assume that all 12,000 employees have families of 4. That means there's about 50,000 people, I'll do easy math, in the community. 50,000 people in a community size of the Tri-Cities between 250,000 and 300,000. That's a lot of people. That's a big footprint. And so if we have everyone that's a part of that team leaving our site, recognizing the value that we place in the work that they do, recognizing and hopefully them embracing the value that they do, and they talk to their families, talk to their relatives, talk to the people in the community. There's a positivity that should surround the people that work on our site, that by that positivity, we also create positivity in our community, in our schools, in our shops, and really anywhere that our folks go that work on the site. And frankly, beyond that, when Hanford is the safest workplace in the Tri-Cities, which is what we strive to achieve, that safety also translates out into the community, on our roads, in our stores, all those places as well. And so there's a fundamental aspect of, John's called it nobility, in the type of work that we do at the site, and instilling pride in the people that come and do this work, I think, is really critical to our long-term success, because it also helps retention and certainly helps recruiting. Because when we recruit, we sell two things. We sell Hanford and we sell the Tri-Cities. And so the work that all of you do to make the Tri-Cities a great place to live helps us to recruit the next generation of workers who are going to continue our mission. And we've got a few years to go. We've got 50 to 70 years left here. So all of that is important. And frankly, I'm thinking about the next generation, because I want your sons and daughters to have children that come to work at the Hanford site to finish the mission in 40 years from now. And so that's a part of the longevity and the strategic thinking that I think both the department and our contractor partners bring to the story here, that I don't think is obvious to everyone, that is important for us to talk about with you, because you're also ambassadors for our community and our site as well. Just a little bit more about our teammates. We really do, again, have a large workforce of dedicated professionals. We appreciate everyone that comes to our site and works on our mission every day. We really do spend a lot of time in focusing on that safety aspect of what we do, because we need the commitment and the long-term support of our community and our workforce to be able to do our important mission. And so we put a lot of value in not only safety as a culture, but safety from a training perspective. And one of the challenges we've faced over the last few years is we've had a little bit more turnover than we typically have had in the past, 20 to 25% across the contractors, though more recently it's getting a little bit better. But that's 25% new people coming to our site who have to understand our safety culture, have to understand a nuclear culture, have to understand our ConOps, and each of the companies has to do a very good job of bringing people into our culture, which our culture is not standard, right? Folks that work at Walmart or Target or anywhere else in the Tri-Cities, generally, as they've worked as a part of a military organization or a large industrial facility, there's a culture that comes with large industrial enterprises and activities that's different than a lot of other places necessarily, but it's alien and has to be taught and has to be sort of ingrained in how people think. And so that acculturation process is really important for us. And I think as you see some of these examples, not only with the Hammer Training Center, but each of the companies, what they do with their employees and the day-to-day focus on safety. For every DOE meeting, we for the first 3 weeks of the month, the last week's ethics week, but we start every meeting with a safety message, and not messages necessarily about driver safety or bike safety. Sometimes those creep in too, but it's about the cultural aspects. It's about trust and communications. It's about questioning attitude. It's about things like that drive a culture, because we're going to make the machines work, right? We've got a lot of really smart engineers and technical folks that make all these machines go to clean up the mission. What holds it all together is the teamwork and the culture that has to be there, so when we face challenges, and we will, because it's a complex cleanup, that culture is what keeps everyone together. That's the culture that says when we have a problem, we don't think about blaming someone. We think about what's the nature of the problem. Is it a process issue? Is it a training issue? Is it a team issue? You start with noble intent and then you work from there. And that team culture is what will hold us together as we go through challenges on the site. And our team has done a phenomenal job. Chris and the waste treatment plant team have done a phenomenal job on the melter heat up challenges we've had. John with some of the challenges at WESF and some of the other projects we run. Bob in the water project that we're working on. So that it's ubiquitous to the site. And that culture, I think, is unique and it's special. And I think that's what's going to keep us successful as we go forward. A couple of, one preamble, I'll say we look at the site with really 4 product lines in mind. One is base operations, right? I'm responsible to make sure that we have roads, water, power, sewer, IT infrastructure, everything that makes a facility and frankly, a site the size of a county operate, because those are all enablers to the cleanup mission. So all that's got to function, and that with the fire department and our Hanford Patrol and the Hammer Training Center, all of those are part of sort of a base operations concept that makes everything else go. So that's one piece, one product line that we manage as a site team. And then there's really 3 others. There's the tank waste mission, which I'll talk about next. And then there's the risk reduction mission, which is more of the traditional demolition, remediation type projects. And then infrastructure we broke out because it's so important to our mission. We want to make sure that gets attention as a product line. And so those are really, if you think about Hanford in simpler terms, which sometimes hard to do, and I can't always do that, but there's 4 basic product lines that we function around to try to help people understand what we're out there doing. Tank waste mission is our top priority, not only from the Hanford site perspective, but also for the Office of Environmental Management and the other 14 sites in the complex that are executing the mission of cleanup from the national security mission. So a couple tank waste mission, I always think about it from the flow of waste through the waste treatment plant. But so tank site seizure removal, it's the bottom left picture. That's really the control room. It's not more elegant than that, doesn't require that much more. But that's the front end of the process, and we've treated about 460,000 gallons of waste, and it's staged for when the waste treatment plant is ready to receive waste and start to vitrify. And we'll be back in operations with the batch we're in right now, probably by the end of the month. Right, Wes? Okay, good. He's required to say yes when I say that. But so, you know, we're learning there as well. This is all part of the ops culture transition that we're going through, because the broader picture that most people don't recognize is we were a feudal system 5 or 10 years ago. It was projects around the site, doing construction or demolition, not a lot of interaction between the projects, didn't have to be. But now as we get closer and closer to the start of the tank waste mission, the start of direct feed low activity waste, that's both the UE offices, it's all of our prime contractors, all working together to make a site-wide machine run. And so that's a fundamental, and it's going to run at 24/7, 365. Once those melters are hot, they're hot. And they're hot until you have to replace them. And so we have to fundamentally shift the way 12,000 people think about the site into an operations mindset. And culture change is hard. We've been at it for a long time. I think we've made a lot of progress. And when I look at the trajectory of the site, it's not that just the trajectory of the machine, it's the trajectory of the culture that has to be aligned with the machine, so we're ready to operate the site safely and efficiently when the machine's ready to start that operation. And so we've worked very hard as a site team to make that transition. I think we've come a long way, but that's a part of the transition that most people don't see unless you're out there every day. So tank waste mission, Tisker doing a great job. It's a demonstration project. We've seen great success, a lot of learning, and we'll continue to learn and make it work, and that's all part of the ops transition. But we weren't treating waste in industrial scale until the beginning of 2022. So exciting to be at that phase. You can see the upper left picture is the waste treatment plant. That's the top of melter 1. What's dangling in the air, and that's not the right term. What's poised appropriately above the melter is a startup heater. So when we start the melter heat up process, it's about a 10-day process. We put heaters in there to heat it up because we're going from ambient temperature to 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't do that in one step. You do it over time to let the machine kind of expand into its new configuration. We had a problem with the startup heater when we started the melter heat up in October. Bechtel, working with our team, working with the vendor, working with academia, have done a phenomenal job of looking at all similar systems that support this machine, and we should start energized testing, and I'm looking at Chris, next week on the the last of the power supplies, the Joule heater power supply, which will be the main power supply for maintaining that molten pool of glass when we get to that part. And then we'll continue with the rest of the commissioning string. So Chris and team have done a phenomenal job, and I think we're really at a poised place. And the great part, I mean, we talk about culture all the time. We started the melter heat up in October. The operators recognized something was off normal. They shut it down. Right? They did exactly what they were supposed to do without a lot of calls, without a lot of fanfare, just did their job, which is exactly a good thing to occur. Now, I would have loved for the process to go from 0 to done, but I also love the fact that we could have a real culture check along the path to show that we're progressing in a way that we're ultimately going to be safe when we operate the machine in the future. The other upper right is a picture of a waste canister down in the pour cave in the load line. You know, if that fell on your toe, it would hurt. It's really big. But the fact that we're moving those things around, and we don't move them fast, so don't worry about that. But the moving those things around, it's a part of the entire machine that's coming together, and it's really exciting for us to go out and walk around the site. So if you saw the waste treatment plant before the pandemic and you went out today, you would not recognize it. It's a brand new place. It's a finished construction project, and we're far into testing. So that's really exciting for us, and we'll progress through the commissioning. And I think you know, our current schedule has us starting into hot commissioning later next year. Chris and team are always working to accelerate that. We're also, you know, going to make sure we operate at the pace the machine's ready and the people ready and the procedures ready to do it safely and get off to a great start. High-level waste facility. You know, we've gotten funding from Congress to progress the design, and we're starting to do some limited low-risk construction. What we've also done, and again, Chris and the Bechtel team working with the department have taken a really hard look at what went right and what didn't go so right on the waste treatment portion for direct feed low activity waste, the plant that's already been constructed. And so we're applying all those learns to this facility. And so as we go forward, I really see this as an opportunity to demonstrate what a DOE contractor team are capable in a major construction project, and take it from where it is today to the end in the 2030s and do it with style. So we're looking forward to that, and I think we're in a good place for that. Risk reduction projects, sort of the traditional thing you think about with the Hanford site. A couple of elements here. You can see U-Farm, upper left, that's 16 tanks. That's what a U-Farm looks like, underground tanks. You can see the catchment basin that was built, I think, late last year. And then we're out there now in the process of putting a cover on the tank farm to reduce the risk of soil, of contamination being spread from water and snow melt as it moves its way down through the soil column towards groundwater. Lower left is AX101 tank retrieval process. That's what the inside of a double shell tank looks like, or I'm sorry, a single shell tank looks like. Those tanks range up to about 1 million gallons capacity, so they're not little tanks. But that process of retrieving tank waste from older single shell tanks and moving the tank waste into double shell tanks, setting that tank waste up for future vitrification is really important, and Wes and the team have done a good job. That's the last tank of the AX farm. We already completed the C farm tank retrievals a couple years ago, so when this tank's done next year sometime, we'll have 2 tank farms that are fully retrieved. And we'll continue down that process. And now we get into the mode of managing our tank space, because once you start vitrifying to make new tank waste, new tank space, you keep retrieving to move the risk from single shell tanks, and then you put the waste in double shell tank, stage it. So there's a very coupled process that we go through, but it's all part of the management of the tank farms program. And that goes with a very robust tank integrity program to make sure those tanks are going to stay intact for as long as we need them to. Upper right is sort of a traditional remediation or demolition project. John and his team continue to change the skyline a little bit, and keeping a demolition workforce working is good for us because there's skills that are perishable. And so we're continuing to work on that aspect of the cleanup effort. And the lower right is a 324 building picture. That's one of the three major projects, cleanup projects, or risk reduction projects we have, and I'll show you a couple on the next slide. 324 and the 100K are the only two left along the river. The rest of the river corridor is effectively cleaned up, other than the groundwater program operations we have out there. And as I think you probably heard in the news last year, we put the K East reactor into long-term storage, and now we're just trying to figure out what movies we show on Movie Night at Hanford on the side of that big building. There will be charged to come into the site to do that. We have to pay the bills. Waste encapsulation and storage facility, we have 1,936 capsules in wet storage out on the site. What you see in that left-hand picture is the 19th of the casks that will ultimately hold those capsules in dry storage for the longer term. It's a much more stable long-term condition. Really a post-Fukushima outcome that all of the sites across the nation that have nuclear materials looked at moving from wet to dry wherever we could, and this is a project that's moving forward. There's a mock-up out at the maintenance and storage facility that's really exceptional, and we do a lot of mock-ups to let people train and practice and demonstrate the equipment in a clean environment, and then we take all those skills and we transfer them into the facility so we can operate efficiently, and they do a great job with that. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a little bit of our award-winning groundwater program. It's not really about the number of gallons treated, it's really about the contaminations taken out of the soil. But when you're taking 2 billion gallons and treating it every year, and you're moving those wells to optimize the amount of material you pull out of the ground, the contamination from the national security mission of more than 45 years, you're going to take stuff out of the soil, and you're going to reduce the risk to the river. And if we looked at I don't have the plume maps here, but if you looked at the plumes along the river, they've been reduced remarkably over the course of time that we've been operating the groundwater program, and we continue to set new records every year in cleaning up the site from that perspective. There's no story about, it's not complete without talking about the infrastructure. You can see in the upper picture, I think that was after our windstorm in February. I think the max wind speed we saw on the site was 88 miles per hour. We had about 13 miles of lines down. And Bob and his team, really working with the other contractor partners, did a phenomenal job. And this is another indicator that we're moving in the direction of 24/7, 365 operations. Power was restored to the things that needed power restored within a day or two. We had power, I think, fully restored 7 or 8 days across the site. 5 years ago, that would have been 30 to 45 days. So we're starting to spare differently. We're starting to look at how we staff our utilities programs differently, things like that, just to make sure that if we have a similar event in the future, which I hope we don't, we are more prepared in the future to deal with that. But if you look at the site overall, right now our focus is on water systems. We've got a new water plant that's replacing the 1943, literally the 1943 water plant. What a great plant, but time for a new plant. And so we've got a water plant construction project going on with a number of other projects supporting water. And then we have an electrical project going on managed by the Bonneville Power Administration for us to increase the reliability of the power coming to the site to make sure that the power going to the melters is reliable. They're already out on site working today. And then we look at things like facilities. We got a lot of older facilities. We look at our roads. And so we have a longer term strategy for infrastructure to make sure that we're making incremental instruction or investments in our infrastructure over time to make sure that infrastructure supports the mission for the next 50 years. That's not a trivial exercise. And so Bob and his team, working with the other contractors, have really done a phenomenal job of triaging and prioritizing the work that we do. And we continue to evaluate within the available funding what we need to work on to make sure that we, again, don't get in the way of the mission with infrastructure. And I think we've done a phenomenal job with that. You can see some of the training activities down lower left. They're not wearing hard hats. That's training exercise. It's not, they're not on site doing it. And then our fire department, I think we're really proud of the cooperative agreements we have with the communities around the Tri-Cities and beyond. Chief Roper does a phenomenal job of keeping everybody tied together. We've got some pretty good equipment, but we also appreciate the great support when we have a challenge on our site. A few years ago, we had a 5,500-acre fire that we got a lot of great community support for. And containing it, never got anywhere near anywhere that was of a concern, really because our firefighters are really good, but they got great support as well. So all of those things together kind of make up the city, county that represent the Hanford site. We do a lot of external engagements. This is one of those. But with the Hanford Advisory Board, you can see we met with the Japanese team from the Nuclear Damage Compensation and Decommissioning Facility Corporation. There's a lot of parallels to what Hanford is, to what Fukushima is, in the way that the structure of the organization, their contracting structures. So we've had a little bit of a head start on them, and so we were able to spend some time and talk about how we do business, because that enterprise approach is unique to Hanford in many ways, and I think they were grateful to hear from our perspective, because it's, there's lots of ways to think about how we do business at Hanford, and it's at the fundamental level, it's not about the contract or the contract type. It's really about the relationship between the customer, the department, and our contractors, and creating a commercial structure that makes everything go. And so when we, I tried to share with the Japanese folks, they were really focused in on the contract part. I said, that's the third part of the discussion. Don't think about that yet. Think about, what are you trying to create as a team, and how do you do that in the environment that you have? Because Japanese culture is a little bit different than our culture, and I worked at Westinghouse when it was Japanese owned, and I saw that firsthand. And so you've got to figure out what team dynamic do you want, and then what do you want your customer to look like, or you as the customer to look like, and then how do you want the team to interact across all these different companies that you'll likely distribute all these contracts to, so you can fundamentally work as enterprise. Once you figure all that out, then the contract type kind of becomes a tertiary decision. We spent a lot of time talking about that, and I'm hopeful we helped them. We also have tribal engagements. We have 3 treaty tribes in the Wanapum that we stay very connected to. All have legitimate connections to our site, and we want to make sure that we maintain that relationship. And then certainly, the Finland discussion, we were able to meet with them during the Waste Management Conference, and have a little bit of a talk, because they have nuclear stuff there too, and if there's things we can learn from. And then really, I spent some time in Olympia. Rich Buell works for me, and he arranged 19 state senator visits or state representative visits in about a day and a half. So we hustled. But the good news is, a lot of those folks want to come out and see the site, because they hadn't been to the site before. And what I'm really trying to do is broaden the support and awareness of the site across this part of the state, because we influence the state, this whole region. It's important for those folks that represent those counties in our state legislature to have a connection to our site as well. So we're excited for, a lot of them are coming out in May and June, and so we'll get them out and talk to about the site and help broaden that awareness. And then there's a myriad of other things we do just to make sure that people understand what we do and appreciate the work, and we garner the support in the virtuous circle that we need to keep the machine moving. My get off the stage slide. So we got this logo in place right before the pandemic, and we put it out for votes across the, I figured we'd get 50 votes. We got over 5,000 people that voted on this, and this is the logo they picked. It was a part of this transition to the enterprise model to help people see a connection across the site in a different way than they had before. Really been helpful for us. So when I think about Hanford, and I hope when you think about Hanford, I hope you start with a sense of optimism about where we are today, the trajectory of the site, the trajectory of the team, the trajectory of the mission, because there's lots of reasons to be optimistic about where we are and where we're going, and I hope that you feel that way. But I also appreciate the support that you provide in the community, because when you make a community that's really a great place to live, and I lived a lot of places, right? I spent 25 years in the Navy. We moved, I think, 16 times. This is a great place to live. And so when you create that environment where we can go out and talk about the opportunities that people have in a career at Hanford, that they can do something different every 5 years and have a very rich career, do it all in the same place, live in a great place in the state of Washington, in the Tri-Cities area. That makes life a lot easier for us to go out and recruit and sell what we do and garner support for what we do. So I appreciate all that you all do to make the Tri-Cities a great place to live, because you are contributing to our mission as well just by doing that, so thank you for that. And so I think I've talked enough, and I could talk longer. This was a speed date on the Hanford site, believe it or not. But I want to leave some time for questions. So with that, I'll just open it up for questions.
Am I good? I have a microphone right here, so we would love to have some interactive Q&A.
And my contractors cannot ask me questions.
Oh.
And you can't hurt my feelings. So
that leaves out quite a few.
Because they try all the time, which is why they can't ask me questions.
I was just curious what percentage of the workforce that's working on the construction and startup of the site is going to be able to transition to actually maintaining and operating the site moving forward?
So the question was about the waste treatment plant. So if you look at the waste treatment plant today, and Chris will give me the thumb picture, but it's largely staffed now for the future of the mission. We have commissioning techs on board. We have, we're working 24/7, 365. I think we have been in that mode for a couple years. We've got our maintenance teams in place. So the waste treatment plant itself is really relatively well staffed. I think there's probably some extra folks on board now for the commissioning. And over time, as Bechtel, through hot commissioning, optimizes operations, and then in the follow-on contract, when they continue to optimize performance, there may be adjustments in workforce over time as we become more efficient in operating the machine. But I think that part is mostly staffed pretty well. It's really the question of the high-level waste facility, and Chris is doing a good job of borrowing people back from the design to support the work that's going on at DFLAW, because we've had a couple issues that his team has had to work through, but then pushing them back into the design role. And so as the design work and the commissioning work sort of ends, there's a natural transition of the folks with the right skill set over onto the design side, because design engineers are sometimes different than plant engineers. But overall, I think there'll be a growth in the high-level waste side, in construction and design, but the construction will be a few years out, more or less. So it would really be, I think, a gradual increase in design folks, and then as we ramp up into construction in a couple of years. We really want to get the design largely complete before we go heavily into construction. Right now, Bechtel is looking at, I'll call it low-risk construction, things that are already designed that don't really have much risk to rework, which happens when you progress a design from 50 to 60% to the end. So we'll have to be mindful of that. But overall, I think the stability of the workforce is pretty much there. And I would say largely at the site level as well. There's going to be skill mix changes over time as projects ebb and flow. But at the macro level, I think the workforce numbers in that range of 12,000 plus or minus is pretty stable.
So you're on an airplane and you're not around here. You're talking to a layperson like me that grew up with all these acronyms, but I have no idea what they are. How do you explain what you do and what we do in this area to just the average Joe?
Do they have to stay awake when I do it?
Yes, they have to stay awake. Yep. It has to be engaging and memorable.
I think the way that we tell our story at the macro level is there was a mission here of national security for 45 years that was focused very heavily on the Cold War and the national priorities for global security. And environmental cleanup and environmental management was a secondary factor. So we've got well-meaning people doing what they thought was right, executing a mission on national prominence, but they contaminated the large site in many ways with materials and contamination that has to ultimately be cleaned up. So our role at the Hanford site today is look at what we have in front of us from a site risk profile perspective, because there's legitimate hazards on our site, whether they're chemical or radiological, and we work every single day to reduce the risks that those hazards represent to our workforce and our community. And we do that by, whether it's engineering solutions or it's generally engineering solutions, to basically safely disposition that waste into a condition that protects the environment and is sustainable for generations to come. And so beyond the technical cleanup aspect, I think what we do is we guarantee the economic foundation of this region in many ways. And so when we talk, it's hard to talk about Hanford to someone that's a layperson, because all they've ever heard of is the bad stuff, right? Because if you Google Hanford, like I said, it's an unpleasant read, especially for me. But at the end of the day, we don't tell the story that we've already demolished more than 1,000 facilities. We don't tell the story that we've already cocooned 7 of the 9 reactors, and one's a national park, and they're now in a stable condition for the next 75 years, and remediated all the contamination and materials around those facilities that made them operate for that time. We don't talk about the groundwater program that continues to reduce risk by taking contamination and pulling it away from and safely dispositioning it so that the Columbia River can remain the jewel of the Pacific Northwest. And so I think talking about it in those terms will help people understand that, yeah, it's technical, and if you're not associated with nuclear and chemical management, it can be scary, but you've got a lot of great people doing a lot of great work, doing it safely and efficiently, and we're making the environment safer every day we're here. And I think if we focus on that level of the story for most folks, I think we were able to garner their support. Does that help? I just made that up, so. It's all true, but it's a good question, because I have trouble with that too. Yeah.
Hi, Brian. First and foremost, I think I speak for everybody here and collectively in the community. Thank you for all you and the team are doing. Thank you for making sure we can have clean water and our children can run around and play and not worry to grow extra toes. My question is regarding energy resiliency and carbon reduction initiatives compounded with the projects you're currently doing. Is that a focus that you guys are currently looking on? Again, the remediation is exceptionally important, but there's also other areas to touch into, and I'd be curious if you could speak to those.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We are working in partnership with the community and clean energy initiatives. My funding is pretty specifically given to the site for environmental cleanup, and I don't have enough. And I also have to be mindful of the fact that when say again? I could always use more. So there's a number of things, right? So one thing is we had our contractors, and Bob brought the Ben Franklin Transit out and did a survey of the folks that come out on the site. See if we could, there's a bus service might be viable to take some cars off the road, right? That's one piece of it. We are receiving electric vehicles. We are working on grant funding to build charging capability. We have limited charging capability right now on the site. And I've put, we're already planning for FY25 because we always think 2 years ahead of the cycle. So we've wedged some money into 25 for additional funding. But I want to try and find other grant sources to bring those dollars in so that we can increase the charging capacity in parallel with the deliveries from GSA who provide us those vehicles. And so we haven't invested heavily on that yet. Because I have real infrastructure needs to support the mission, and that's, the mission is the mission, so I have to focus on that first. But then we're also looking at things like electrification of boilers. We have a boiler that supports our evaporator on the site. We have boilers at the waste treatment plant that support direct feed low activity waste, but ultimately support high level waste as well. And so, we've asked Chris, and Tom Fletcher's had conversations with Chris about when we design the boilers for the high level waste facility, designing them to be electric boilers, and then backfitting DF-Law with those boilers as we go so we can eliminate some of those other areas where we are contributing to the carbon footprint. So we are looking at it at a macro level. We're looking at where we can streamline facilities, and there's always a number of things. Any new facilities have to meet LEEDs plus requirements to make them more energy efficient. So all of those are part of the bigger picture, but I have to go at an appropriate pace focused on the mission first, and that's where the grant funding and other sources of funding are going to be important for us in the short term to kind of provide a little bit of bridge, at least in the electric vehicle world. And then anything that PNNL does, anything that the community does, where we can work together and optimize locations and things like that, we'll try and partner as well. And we're already engaged with the partnership. John's part of that team as well.
Yeah. Hey, at a high level, the things that you're doing out there are really fascinating. Again, thank you. And you mentioned the idea of some tourism possibilities on the site. I think it's a great story, the history, the heritage, and how it came to be, and then what you're doing now. What do you envision there?
Yeah, that's a good question. We got into a situation with the state of Washington relative to how we manage our ambient air boundary, because we have to also manage the air boundary over the site as we do our work. And there were some really conservative concerns about bringing tours on the site. And so we ultimately had to curtail public tours as a result of that. We still do tours with local, federal, state folks that have a specific interest, but we haven't been able to do public tours other than the B reactor. And I think you're coming in the back door when you come into the B reactor anyway. So, it's something that we've thought about and doing limited tours at some point in the future. We're still a little bit in the post-pandemic world, so we really haven't thought about it seriously yet. I think it's a good concept, good observation, and I'd like to do it. We just have to work our way through how we would do it and stay within the boundaries that we operate. Because our regulatory environment, if you haven't recognized it, is really complex. Yeah, so thanks.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Why is it important for this week's announcement in regards to a conceptual agreement? Why was that important for cleanup and our community? What would you say?
That's a really great question, and if you read the article, it talks about what I can say and what I can't say, and I can't say a lot. But what I think it does represent is the culmination of 3 years of discussions between the Department of Energy, the State of Washington, Department of Ecology, and the Environmental Protection Agency to define a way ahead on the tank waste mission that we all agree is affordable and achievable. We started that conversation really in October of 2018, before there was even the concept of holistic negotiations, because we recognized there were challenges to what I'll call the program of record. And so the benefit of the agreement, though it's probably going to take, now here's the thing I'll say, the lawyers now have the opportunity to go back and codify everything we agreed to over 60 sessions. That's going to take a while, right? It just does. So, we're probably a year, 18 months from a final agreement on all those things. But the fact that we were able to agree together from a principal perspective on what lies ahead, and that the president's budget in 24 supports that way ahead, that's a massive success from a lot of people over a long period of time. And it does create that alignment between the department and our regulators that helps us all be more successful, because we're all aligned in the mission going forward, and we'll have fewer things to argue about as we go forward. So for me, it was a massive win for us, our team, really a culmination of 5 years of work, really 3 years of that other effort. But it does demonstrate that we can align and we can work together and we can achieve something we're all committed to, and we can do it in a way that will continue to maintain the support we require for the mission. So that's a great question. Thank you. That's my hook, right? Okay. So thank you all for what you do and the time, and I appreciate it. And John and Bob or others here, answer our hard questions.